Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I want to share something a little different, something that's been on my mind for a while now. I thought I knew my wife. After 53 years of marriage, I thought I knew everything about her. My name is David Mitchell. I'm 76 years old, and last year, I asked my wife a question I'd been afraid to ask for decades. Her answer changed everything I believed about our life together. We met when we were both 22 at a church social in Portland, Oregon. Her name is Catherine, though I've called her Kathy since our second date. She was wearing a yellow dress, and she laughed at something her friend said, and I remember thinking I never heard a laugh like that before, so genuine and unguarded. I introduced myself. We talked for maybe 20 minutes, and by the end of the evening, I knew I wanted to marry her. It sounds naive now, but that's how it was back then. You met someone, you felt something, and you moved forward. We were engaged 4 months later and married 6 months after that. I was finishing my degree in civil engineering. She was working as a secretary at an insurance company. We had almost no money, so our honeymoon was 2 nights at the coast in a motel that smelled like cigarettes and salt water. We didn't care. We were young and in love, and we thought that was enough. For a long time, it was enough. I got a job with the city, working on infrastructure projects, roads and bridges and water systems. Kathy kept working until our first child came, and then she stayed home like most women did in those days. We had 3 children over 7 years, 2 boys and a girl, and our life became the life that everyone around us was living. I worked long hours. Kathy managed the household, and we moved through the years the way you're supposed to, checking off milestones like items on a list. First house, better job, kids in school, summer vacations, PTA meetings, Little League games. We were happy. At least, I thought we were happy. Kathy smiled and kept the house beautiful and never complained, even when I worked late or came home too tired to really talk. She seemed content. She seemed like she had everything she wanted. And because I was young and foolish, and probably a little selfish, I never thought to question whether what I was seeing was the whole truth. Our marriage settled into a pattern that I imagine a lot of marriages settle into. We were partners. We were affectionate. We raised our children together and made decisions together and went to bed together every night. But somewhere along the way, without either of us really noticing, we stopped having the kind of conversations we'd had at the beginning. We talked about practical things, about the kids and the bills, and what needed to be fixed around the house. But we stopped talking about ourselves, about who we really were underneath all the roles we were playing. I told myself that was normal. I told myself that's what happens when you've been married for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. The passion becomes companionship. The intensity becomes comfort. You trade the uncertainty of new love for the stability of old love, and that's a good trade. That's what grown-ups do. But I was lying to myself. I know that now. About 3 years ago, we were sitting on our back porch one evening in early summer. The kids are all grown now, all living in different states with families of their own, and the house feels enormous and quiet in a way it never did before. Kathy was reading a book, and I was just sitting there, watching the light fade, and I had this sudden, overwhelming sense that I didn't know the woman sitting next to me. Not really. Not the way I should have known her after more than 50 years together. It wasn't a comfortable feeling. It was actually terrifying, if I'm being honest. Here was the person I'd spent my entire adult life with, the person I'd raised children with, the person I'd assumed I'd grow old with in perfect understanding, and I realized I couldn't tell you what she was thinking. I couldn't tell you what she dreamed about, or what she regretted, or what she wished had been different. I'd spent 5 decades looking at her every single day, and I'd never really seen her. That feeling stayed with me for months. I'd watch her moving through the house, making coffee, or folding laundry, or working in her garden, and I'd wonder who she was when I wasn't looking. What did she think about during all those quiet hours when I was at work? What did she feel when our children left home one by one and the house got emptier? Was she happy? Was she lonely? Did she ever look at me the way I was looking at her now, wondering if she really knew me at all? I wanted to ask her. I wanted to sit her down and have a real conversation, the kind we hadn't had in years, maybe decades. But I was afraid. I was 73 years old, and I was afraid to ask my own wife what her life had really been like. What if she told me she'd been unhappy? What if she told me she'd wanted something different, something more, and I'd been too blind or too self-absorbed to see it? What if everything I believed about our marriage, about our life together, turned out to be a story I'd told myself? So I didn't ask. I let another year pass, and then another, and the question just sat there between us. This invisible thing I couldn't stop thinking about, but couldn't bring myself to voice. I kept waiting for the right moment, for some natural opening in the conversation, but the right moment never came. Or maybe I just kept finding reasons not to recognize it when it did. Then last year, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, something shifted. We were having lunch together, just sandwiches at the kitchen table, and Kathy said something about needing to go through some old boxes in the attic. She wanted to sort out what to keep and what to give away, she said, because she didn't want the kids to have to deal with all that stuff someday. The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, so resigned to the idea that we were getting closer to the end than the beginning, it just broke something open in me. I put down my sandwich and I looked at her across the table. This woman I'd loved for 53 years, and I asked her the question I'd been too afraid to ask. I said, "Kathy, have you been happy? In our marriage, in our life together, have you actually been happy?" She stopped eating. She looked at me with this expression I couldn't read, and for a long moment she didn't say anything. I thought maybe I'd made a terrible mistake. I thought maybe I'd just opened a door that should have stayed closed. But then she put down her sandwich too, and she folded her hands on the table, and she started to talk. She told me that when we got married, she'd had dreams she'd never told me about. She'd wanted to be a teacher. She'd wanted to go to college and get her degree and work with children. Not as a mother, but as an educator, someone who made a difference in young people's lives beyond her own family. But in those days, that's not what women did, or at least not women in our circle. You got married, you had children, and you put your own ambitions aside. That was just how it was. She said she'd made peace with it. She'd chosen to focus on raising our kids and making a home, and she'd found meaning in that. But there were days, especially after the children started school and the house got quiet, when she'd feel this ache, this sense of something missing. She'd wonder what her life might have looked like if she'd made different choices. If she'd been born 20 years later, in a different time, when women had more options. She told me that she'd been lonely sometimes, even when I was right there in the same room. She said I was a good husband in all the practical ways, that I worked hard and provided for the family and never raised my voice or my hand. But emotionally, she said, I was often somewhere else. I was thinking about work, or I was tired, or I was just not really present. And over the years, she'd learned to stop trying to reach me in those moments. She'd learned to keep her deeper thoughts to herself, because it seemed like I didn't really want to hear them. She wasn't angry when she said all this. She wasn't accusing me or trying to hurt me. She was just telling me the truth, quietly and calmly, and somehow that made it worse. I sat there listening to her describe a loneliness I'd never noticed, a whole interior life she'd been living while I was oblivious, and I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. But then she said something I didn't expect. She said that despite all of that, despite the dreams she'd let go and the loneliness she'd sometimes felt, she didn't regret our marriage. She said she'd loved me, really loved me, even when I was distant or distracted. She said that raising our children together had been one of the great joys of her life, and that watching them grow into good people made every sacrifice worth it. She said that over the years, she'd built a life that had its own kind of richness, its own moments of beauty and meaning, even if it wasn't the life she'd once imagined. And then she asked me a question. She said, "Have you been happy, David?" I didn't know how to answer at first. I'd been so focused on whether I'd failed her, whether I'd given her the life she deserved, that I hadn't really asked myself that question. Had I been happy? I thought about all those years of working long hours, of feeling like I was doing what I was supposed to do, but never stopping to ask if it was what I wanted to do. I thought about all the evenings I'd come home too tired to really connect with my family, all the moments I'd missed because I was thinking about the next project, the next deadline, the next thing on the list. I told her the truth. I said I didn't know if I'd been happy. I said I'd been so busy trying to be a good husband and a good father and a good employee that I'd never really stopped to feel anything. I just kept moving forward, checking off boxes, telling myself this was what success looked like. But now, at 76 years old, I couldn't tell you if any of it had actually made me happy. I could just tell you that I'd done it. We sat there at that kitchen table for a long time, just looking at each other, and I realized something. This was the most honest conversation we'd had in decades, maybe ever. We'd spent 53 years being married, but we'd spent most of that time playing the roles of husband and wife rather than actually knowing each other. We'd been so busy maintaining the structure of our marriage that we'd forgotten to tend to the connection underneath. That conversation changed everything. Not in some dramatic, earth-shattering way, but in a quiet, fundamental way. We started really talking to each other again. Not just about groceries and doctor's appointments and what the kids were up to, but about ourselves. About what we felt and what we thought and what we wished we'd done differently. About who we'd been before we met and who we'd become along the way. Kathy told me more about those dreams she'd let go. I told her about the doubts I'd had about my career, the times I'd wondered if I was in the right field at all, but felt too committed to change course. We talked about our parents, our childhoods, the things that had shaped us that we'd never really discussed. We talked about our kids, not as proud parents listing accomplishments, but as two people trying to understand where we'd succeeded and where we'd fallen short. And slowly, over these past months, I've started to actually know my wife. Not the version of her I'd constructed in my head, the contented homemaker who never had a doubt or a regret, but the real person, complex and thoughtful and full of her own interior life. It turns out she's been there all along. I just hadn't been paying attention. I wish I'd asked her that question 30 years ago. I wish I'd been brave enough, or awake enough, or honest enough to look at her and really see her and ask her what her life was like. But I can't go back. None of us can. All we can do is start where we are. I'm 76 years old. My wife is 75. We've been married for 53 years. And in some ways, we're just now starting to really know each other. That should make me sad, and sometimes it does. But mostly, it makes me grateful. Grateful that we still have time. Grateful that we finally had the courage to be honest with each other. Grateful that after all these years, we're learning what love actually means. Love isn't just the feeling you have at the beginning. It isn't just the commitment to stay together through the hard times. Those things matter, but they're not enough. Real love is the willingness to actually see the other person, to ask them who they are and what they need and how they really feel. Real love is being brave enough to be vulnerable, to admit you don't have all the answers, to sit across the table from someone you've known for decades and ask them to tell you the truth. If you're married, or if you're in a long relationship, I want you to ask yourself something. Do you really know your partner? Not the version of them you've created in your mind, not the role they play in your household, but the actual person underneath. When was the last time you asked them about their dreams, their regrets, their interior life? When was the last time you had a conversation that went deeper than logistics? It's never too late to start. I know because I did it at 73. But don't wait as long as I did. Don't let decades pass while you live side by side with someone you love but don't truly know. Ask the hard questions now. Be honest now. Be vulnerable now. Because knowing someone, really knowing them, that's what makes a life together worth living. My wife told me the truth, and it changed everything. Not because the truth was easy or comfortable, but because it was real. And real is what we should have been aiming for all along.